Awesome. Just give it a couple more minutes and go from there. All right. So if anyone else who just happened to join, if you do have any questions throughout, there's a Q&A section just at the top there. So just feel free to obviously pop your questions in, and I'll answer accordingly to when you ask. I do apologise, there's a bit of glare going on. So if you have trouble with any issues with the screen or anything like that, just let me know. I'll try to turn up the lights or something like that just to make sure there's not like much glare. Cool, might just get underway with it. So, like I said, just to introduce myself, I'm Andrew Casby. I'm one of the VET Sport and Recreation teachers for Year 1. So, yeah, just to go through obviously a bit of information behind the actual course itself. So, basically, it's this course here is basically VCEVET, okay? So VCEVET programs are basically vocational programs that are approved within VCAR, so the VCAA, and also they're accredited by ASQA, so the Australian Skills Quality Authority. Basically, throughout these programs here, throughout the majority of them, it's nationally recognised qualifications, which allows students the opportunity to actually get, firstly, they can attain a score throughout sport and recreation, both through completing both Year 1 and Year 2. And they can also go on to further study as well. So they can actually go into diploma certificates and the different avenues in the sport and recreational field. There's 4 units essentially. So obviously through 4 semesters, there's Unit 1 and 2, which we complete in the first year, and then 3 and 4, which we complete in the second year. It also can contribute to your student's VCAL certificate as well. Okay, which is quite handy, especially if a student is going down that path there and they're completing this VET course as a result. Through VET, it basically functions within the national training framework. So one thing that we tend to do throughout our VET courses, throughout each of them, but also for sport and recreation, is we try to make sure that we keep our courses up to date and ensure they actually are compliant within the training framework. So basically what we do is we're constantly upgrading it year by year. So in case, a program, so to speak, has been, I guess, superseded is the word we use, then what we can do from there is we ensure that we obviously map and plan accordingly, so that way we're actually compliant with the most up-to-date information as well. So basically the main aims of this program is to ensure that students are basically able to be given the required knowledge and skills to achieve the units of competency that will enhance the opportunity to get employment. Okay, so there's a variety of different employment fields. Basically, at the end of this qualification, students will achieve a Certificate 3 in sport and recreation should they complete at the end of Unit 4 or the second year. And then they can go on into a different variety of fields from there. So some different qualifications they can go into is like gym instructorship. So they can move into a Certificate 3 in fitness. They could also go into Certificate 4 in fitness and then go into personal training from there. There's a number of students who can get their aqua license as well. So they can go and teach students in swimming instructorship, as well as students who can go into different areas of coaching also. So again, it's to make sure, obviously, that we're making sure that our students are compliant to go into that sort of framework, to meet that sort of standards as well, and obviously to ensure they can actually go into the path they desire. So within our actual program as well, like I mentioned before, we have a recognised credential to make sure that they have a more informed choice about their vocation and career paths. So if a child does, even if a student wants to go into teaching, for instance, there is a coaching element which can obviously benefit them with that instructorship, so they can actually get used to that also. It also allows students to have the opportunity to have select electives that can enable them to have become multi-skilled and enhance their employment opportunity and further their training across other sectors in the sport and recreation industry, as I mentioned before. So some things that we do end up using is we have a gym here, which is CRC Fit, which personal trainers, external personal trainers use. So we can use that facility there, for instance, when we teach students the main components of performing a bench press, for instance. So basically the main objective for the actual program itself is to ensure that students can going out into the field and have be work ready essentially. So they will understand the full components of how to perform an activity. So like for instance, a bench press, okay, different spotting techniques. It might be the form that was required, muscles being involved and so forth as well. So we do go into a little bit more depth with it as well, both across first year and second year. Another thing that we tend to do is we have a variety of different courses and subjects that we do happen to make sure we comply with. So even things like first aid, so students can get their first aid training. We do have a UOC, or unit of competency, called organised schedules, which complies with and aligns with both year 1 and year 2, which basically goes into a smaller framework of organising a tennis tournament, for instance, in year 1. We do that usually within our own classes, and then from there it actually goes into them students planning in year 2 the SACS tennis tournament as well. So there's a couple of different bits of things that obviously overlap and align, which is quite good. So basically with CRC Sydenham, we are a recognised RTO, okay, to deliver the actual sport and recreation course. So it basically also means that we can get students from year 10s to come into our course, but we also get students from the BMAC VET cluster. So there are external schools that do happen to send their children here who also complete the course as well. So that's one of the benefits of us being a recognised RTO. Basically, we need to make sure that with our training that all the training courses that we do provide are relevant within the VRQA, which is the Victorian Victorian State and Training Authority. In 2021, which is obviously for next year, but this year as well, we completed the course code SIS 301115, okay, which is Cert 3 in Sport and Recreation. And that basically, like I said before, gets delivered over a 2-year period. Basically, for students in year 1, they complete 9 units of competency. This year, because of COVID, we only could deliver 7 because of different requirements. We ended up not delivering first aid, for instance, this year, unfortunately. But in a normal year without COVID, we'll definitely deliver 9 subjects, 9 units. And then in year 2, they complete 5 units. Ideally for students, the idea behind all of this as well is that the course itself is not solely just based on just going out and having to kick a footy and stuff like that. There's a lot of sports administration that we focus on. So we do go into relevant areas like workplace legislations, like I said before about coaching sessions as well. So there's a lot of, making sure you recognise your participants and so forth as well to make sure it aligns. And in the first year, if a student needs a minimum of 75% to actually qualify to go into year 2. The unfortunate thing is if a student does happens to fail in that sort of subject itself or one unit itself, it does mean that they have to go into a TAFE course to actually finish off that unit, which again, it comes out of an out-of-pocket expense for them. So there's kind of more incentive as well that because we're delivering a course, which is essentially a TAFE course, that students are making sure that they're putting obviously their 100% effort in. Within VET, one of the main things that students should be aware of at an earlier starting point is that it does require to have 100% competency. It's either 100% correct or it's 0% correct. And basically what we do is we go through to make sure that students are aware of that. Otherwise, unfortunately, there's no grey area in the subject itself. So within that sort of theory work that we do happen to complete, students need to make sure that obviously they're hitting the required targets that we obviously set to them as trainers. So for students who are doing VCAL as well, okay, just obviously to touch into that a little bit more, it is recognised. So it does actually mean that for each 90 hours of training or for each unit they do happen to complete, okay, it goes towards 1 credit point towards the satisfactory completion of their VCAL program. So it does obviously add up for them as well. So if they do happen to choose that they want to do a trade, for instance, and they prefer VCAL, but they still want to complete sport and recreation, it does still get recognised towards their certificate at the end of the day. So that's one of the main things. With students as well, if they do happen to, let's say, not meet that required target of competency, okay, instead of getting a certificate 3 in sport and recreation, they get a certificate of attainment instead. So it's not exactly the degree that they want to get to or the certificate they require, okay, which like I said before, it does mean that they obviously would have to go to a TAFE and complete another tertiary course to get that competency for that, okay. That basically covers that area there in terms of VCAL recognition. Structured workplace learning. So this is another thing that we also encourage students to do. With VCAL, basically, structured workplace learning is an appropriate component for all VCEVET programs. So basically provide students with work experience in the relevant field to make sure that they actually have sort of like a background knowledge behind it. So basically the main key points we find from this is that it enhances skills development. There's a more practical element of application of the industry knowledge that, you know, within the actual assessment task, which it does align obviously with one of our assessments. You know, it is actually a unit of, it is a part of their competency to make sure that they have this structured workplace learning under their belt. And also it means that they, because they have that background knowledge into those fields, they have further chance of having increased employment opportunities and marketability. It's recommended, beforehand it was 80 hours recommended to students, okay, by VCAL. We're actually saying that it's actually 20. And then what will happen as a result is we'll provide them with online testing that they'll need to complete. So it's not recommended of 80 anymore. But for a lot of students as well, for what I've found is that if they've completed workplace experience and workplace learning at, you know, a sport and recreation industry or field, so like for instance, rebel sport, for instance, majority of them actually being kept on, which is a positive as well. So it might even be the same thing, like if they're doing their workplace, if they do their work experience through a gym, for instance, or whatnot, they might actually be kept on. You know, it could be even something like a lifeguard as well, if they have that sort of field and they have that background knowledge also. So it is something that's actually quite good for students to actually get involved in. What basically happens is if a student is currently going to go into year 10 and is also going to actually, is going to complete their work experience at a school, for instance, or at a place that they might know, it can actually be logged and actually credited towards their 20 hours. So they just need to have the relevant documentation that they've actually completed those 20 hours as well. So that's just for us to have in terms of the admin aspect. So this type of work experience as well can take place over holidays. It can take place during weekends, during the school week. It's just dependent on when the student's available. Obviously, if they have extracurricular activities that they're doing, might playing football, netball, soccer, whatever it might be, then again, obviously it's whatever they might see fit. But it is encouraged, obviously, that they do have access to you know, these sort of areas at an earlier stage to make sure that it increases their opportunity later on within this course. So in terms of the actual program itself, there are some specific requirements as well. So one thing is that students will be given an IVET student workbook to work through, okay? Majority of the actual workbook as well, the activities that we do complete are required to be actually typed up and printed. So that's one of the new formats we've actually incorporated within the college, just to make sure that, you know, with handwriting, for instance, a lot of students we've found that have had really messy handwriting, and unfortunately, you know, it's not legible, so we can't actually read it. So what we've decided to do is we've decided to actually go into an online platform to make sure that students, you know, can type up their answers. By all means, if the handwriting's needed, they can submit it and it's legible, then that's fine as well. But it is encouraged for students to actually be able to bring in a device, that way they can type up their answers and so forth, which we'll go through students as well a little bit more in depth when they do have their inductions for that. It is encouraged that students do happen to wear PE uniform as well. It's actually a requirement that they do wear PE uniform. And any students that are external will obviously need to wear their PE uniform that's given to them by their college. Anyone who's participating in a year 1 class will be required to actually attend from either Tuesday or Wednesday from 1:50 p.m. to 5:20. Again, give or take, obviously, when timetable structures are, but that's usually the timetable structure we do have. Anyone who does a U2 subject will be on a Thursday, so it won't actually clash. Now, it does say here as well that students are encouraged to take up a gym membership. Now, we do have access to a gym here, obviously, like I mentioned before. You know, if they do have access to it and they can apply their knowledge, it's obviously something that's going to be a benefit to them, especially if they decide to do something like that later on in life. Obviously, they can apply their knowledge from an earlier age. So it is encouraged, obviously, for for those students to obviously take up that gym membership. So in terms of possible pathways, like I mentioned before, so again, like obviously students can attain a higher qualification such as a Cert 4 diploma and something beyond that. So if they decide to go into a bachelor, it can also apply to like a Bachelor of Physiology or sports science as well. Again, it depends. That obviously will align with other subjects as well, not just solely sport and recreation, but it does have the possibility of actually enhancing their knowledge behind those courses as well. As mentioned before, Cert 3 in sport and recreation can lead to things like students getting into Cert 3 in fitness, which then can allow them to do gym instructorship. If they get a Cert 3 and 4 in fitness, then they can obviously go into personal training. Again, it's just dependent on the student what they decide to do. As I mentioned before as well, like with students completing their certificate within 2 years, they get actually recognised with the full certificate of a Cert 3 in sport and recreation. So they need to complete the 2 years. If they unfortunately miss out in year 1, you know, and it might be this next year, for instance, if they're in year 10, then they do have the opportunity in year 11. But if they're in year 11 and they've completed this subject, and they've missed this subject and they try to go into year 2, then unfortunately they can't do that because you need to have both units. Again, like I did mention before as well, any not yet competent, so an MYC in any units will mean that if students complete it, they get a certificate of attainment, just to mention that one last time. So in terms of who to contact, there's a variety of different trainers that we do have. You can call the college. The number's provided here, so 9361 0000. There are a few trainers as well that do happen to teach. So there's myself, and my email is here. You have Shannon McFerrin and Peter Wilson. They're also year 1 trainers, and Andrew Molliker is a year 2 trainer. If you do have any questions, feel free to obviously flick us an email. I'm happy to obviously reply, or call the college. I'm happy to give you a contact back at any time as well. And that's about it in terms of the presentation. So if you do happen to have any questions, feel free to obviously post that down below, or you can take yourself off mute as well. I'm happy to obviously attend to what you might have. So I can't see if anyone's got their hands up or anything like that as well. So just feel free. If you don't have any questions, you are free to leave as well. But again, like I said before, if you feel free to just post it in the chat bar and I can answer it for you as well. Just try and look here. Not many questions. If you don't have any questions, by all means, you're free to go. And thanks obviously joining in as well today, guys. I appreciate it as well. Is it a different placement each year? Are you referring to work experience, sorry, Catherine, or just trying to... So in terms of work placements and Thailand, the students, they can work at 2 different workplaces if they choose to, but it's only 1 year where they have to actually complete the 20 hours. In the second year, more likely than not, it's encouraged for students to actually complete the coursework because it can be scored. So it will only be 1 year of work experience or work placement, for instance, not 2. Yep, so Kathy, just to answer your question about results counting towards the ATAR, yes. So with this course, it does actually count towards their ATAR. They can do scored in year 12. This is one of the options in terms of later on that they can do. So yeah, it does actually count towards the ATAR if the student chooses to later on. In terms of your question, Georgia, about it connecting with sports science, in terms of connecting with it, it's more so that it provides more background knowledge for the students. So it doesn't actually have sports science, so to speak, in the actual course, but in terms of a lot of the terminology that we do use, it does provide a bit of background for them. So, you know, if they link that up with PE, for instance, and they do biomechanics, which is what they do in year 12 or unit 3 and 4, for PE, it does actually provide them with that sort of foundation, I guess. So because I am PE trained, a lot of the other trainers are PE trained as well. So we try to make sure that we emphasize that use of terminology as well. In terms of orientation day, Michelle, I'm not 100% certain yet. Haven't been given a whole heap of information regarding that. Potentially, I guess what will happen is we'll probably get more information on that later on. So it might be communicated to parents where they can where students can actually get an orientation day brought in. So hopefully we do. It just has to be. It just depends, sorry, on being COVID safe. That's really the main thing. So that's why unfortunately we're actually able to be at school today. So yeah, did that help in terms of those questions as well that you might have? Sorry, I've just got those ones there. There is an orientation down the second, so that might help. No worries, Michelle. Yeah, I thought there would be. Sorry, to go on to that as well, Michelle, I thought there would be, but again, like I said, it's a lot of things are chopping and changing at the moment just because of everything with COVID. So again, once we get more information, it sort of gets passed down to us. So unfortunately, it can be, sort of like last minute as well. Any other questions as well? Georgia, did that help out with your question? Sorry, I don't know if did that help in terms of what I mentioned before, or? Cool. Does anyone else have any questions that they'd like to ask as well? Obviously, feel free to obviously post that in there. Not in this course in particular, Georgia. More so PE Unit 3 and 4. Orientation will be in school, Nadia, just to answer your question as well. But yeah, like I mentioned before, Georgia, yeah, it won't, not necessarily in these courses, because it's more, like I said before, it's more sports-based, like sort of admin sort of stuff that we do happen to do. There obviously is sport components towards it as well. Otherwise, it wouldn't be sport and recreation. So a lot of things we do happen to do are like coaching units as well. We look into legislations like workplace legislations, OH&S and so forth. First aid courses like they happen to run as well, and they happen to go through as well. So yeah, just to obviously go on to that point. No worries at all. Cool. Does anyone else have any other questions that perhaps like answered? I believe it might be a full day thing, Nadia. I think, sorry, not a full day thing. I apologise. More often not, with the timetable structure that we're actually going to get, students will have, it would be a 2-hour block that students will have to come in. So I guess it depends on the timetable they've been assigned through their feeder schools as well, where they actually do happen to come in. But again, like I said, once we get more information, we're going to try to communicate that as quickly as we can. So if you do happen to have any questions, just feel free to obviously send that through, and I'll be happy to answer them for you as well. Georgia, to answer your question, yes, I'll look, in terms of the sports science, I would say yes. Personally, yes, because like I said before, this course here mainly looks at the sports admin side of things and into coaching and so forth and all that sort of jazz. So I believe if is your child looking to go into sports science, is that what they're looking into particularly? Yeah, I would say PE would be the main thing. PE, maybe even health. They would have to do a lot of sciences as well. So maybe biology they would actually go into also to help benefit them to go into sports science. So those are probably the main two subjects I'd be making sure they focus on, is biology and also PE. If you're not able to attend the orientation, that's fine. Basically, what will happen is we'll get a list of students who should be in the class. And then what we'll go from there is we'll send a message out on sector, or I'll send a message out on sector. Basically, for orientation, what we're looking to do is give a handbook out to students. Just make sure they're obviously aware of what's entailed within the subject itself, and then go from there. So specific requirements, tasks that we'll need to complete, and so forth. So if students aren't able to attend, that's okay. We'll find a way around making sure they actually are aware and in the loop. No worries at all, Alex. Does anyone else have any questions that they may need to ask? Cool. Otherwise, thanks for attending, guys, as well. I appreciate it. Obviously, hope this gives you a bit more clarification into 2021, and look forward to seeing your children in the near future. So have a great day, or great evening, I should say, and hope to see you all shortly.